light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved ever be. Welcome, I am Sister Who. Considering that I've been Sister Who for over 20 years at this point, there have been quite a range of people I've met over those years. And I like to think I've learned something from most of them, if not all of them. And I do remember many of them, especially the ones with whom there was a more significant personal interaction, I suppose. And at a time when I was struggling to define how does one go through life dealing with struggles, remaining honest about them, and yet somehow always putting your best foot forward in a way that nevertheless had integrity and honesty. Growing up in a small town in the Midwestern part of the United States, it often seemed to me that the 11th commandment, right after the 10 commandments out of the Bible, was that thou shalt be polite at all costs. And one of the first casualties of that, one of the first costs, was honesty, because it was considered rude or inappropriate to ever mention any sort of struggle or difficulty or unpleasantness. Or you're supposed to be happy all the time, and or at least very pleasant about it, and if it was unpleasant, then it should be hidden. But of course, if it's hidden, then you can't deal with it. And like an undiagnosed cancer, it would just grow and fester and finally kill somebody. Everything in my town seemed very pleasant on the surface, but I talked with a woman who worked as a nurse in the emergency room department of the local hospital on one occasion, and she commented that actually there were quite a number of attempted suicides that were brought into the emergency room. And one would never guess that by looking at the town, because it was so unspeakable that such a thing would happen. And so I was trying to figure out how one could be honest and have integrity and still somehow push things in a positive direction, rather than encouraging any sort of wallowing in, when something bad happens. Trying to strike a balance between being honest about it while at the same time not being defined by it. Because the bad thing that happened is virtually never the last thing that ever happens to you, unless you happen to die in the incident yourself. But there are other positive things that follow. And if the negative incident becomes the defining element of your life, you miss a lot of the good stuff. And so for years, I kept working on, and I'm still working on, a strategy, an emotional health strategy, I suppose you could say, of how to be honest and yet be positive, because as much as I need to acknowledge the negative, I don't have to let the negative define me. I let the negative fill its little box, and that's as far as it goes, and that's what it is, and that's all that it is. And then I remember that my life is much bigger than that negative little box of that incident or event or component. At this time, when I was trying to figure out where does Sister Who belong, one person described me as the liminal among the fringe, which I thought was a delightful phrase. It basically means that in those marginalized people, the ones who are always kind of on the outside, Sister Who is one of those people who's always on the outside of everything. Kind of like Marilyn Monroe's comment that, the quote from Marilyn Monroe, that I guess I belong to the world because I've never really belonged to anyone or anything else. And So yeah, I can understand a lot of what it means to be an outsider and to be an anomaly, and my whole life has been that way. And so there's always been struggle from my first day of kindergarten to the present. Um, but I needed to get to a point where all of that struggle didn't become the definition of who and what I am. I had to find the me that was bigger than that corner. That if I'm to be an anomaly my whole life, somebody might think of it as being cornered by life and disempowered and limited somehow. But I chose to find the self, the sense of me that was bigger than that corner, something that all the struggle in the world couldn't contain, that no matter how much struggle, how much adversity, how marginalized I am, how excluded, I can sit down with a notebook and I can write. And I can write very well, and people like what I've written. And they tell me that it's inspirational and helpful to them, and I'm very glad to make that contribution. And there's nothing about all the world's exclusion or derision or devaluing or rejection that can stop me from writing whatever I feel like writing. That's an ability that I have that the world can't interfere with. There is nothing about all the rejection I've ever experienced that stops me from being able to walk up to a stranger and say, "Do you need help?" Or to see somebody experiencing a loss and just to come stand by them, give them moral support and listen, hold them if they need to cry, give them a hug if the world has been too hard lately. If someone is trying to accomplish something and feels like they're doing it all alone, I can be the one to meet them at the finish line and cheer when they cross the finish line. That much I can do. Even if the world never accepts me, I can still do all that. And so in trying to come to terms with what are still my abilities, what are the abilities that all the rejection in the world can't take away? I recall reading a poster once that said there is not enough darkness in the entire universe to put out the light of a single candle. And sometimes I have to remember that it doesn't matter how much darkness there is. I'm the one who decides whether my candle burns or not. And so I was in this transitional year. We had finished the first 55 Sister Who shows, and I had gotten tired of struggling against an adversarial administration for making TV shows. And I wondered if there would ever be another show, because I was just so tired from the struggle that I had to back away. And so the last show we made, which is actually number 53, but it was the 55th show because of a couple Christmas specials we'd done. It's tentatively titled The Final Episode. And we said right in the episode, I don't know if this is the final one or not, but for the moment, I can't see in the future, and I don't know what will happen. Now, of course, we have over 240 episodes, so obviously there were a lot of shows made after that, but at the time I didn't know. And I was struggling to define, so what do I contribute to the world? How do I belong here in any sense of the word? And during that time, I met an elderly Italian lady who had had a remarkable life. She was telling me all these different stories. But in the present of her life was this one dark little box called breast cancer. And it was not big enough to encompass all of who she was. It was not big enough to define her or her life, and she was very aware of that. So I was explaining to her what I was struggling with and the answers I was trying to find, and she was reflecting on some of the things she had been through. We were just sort of comparing notes in a very mutually respectful, egalitarian sort of way. And then she smiled and she got up and she said, "I want you to have something." And it was a gift that was given to her many years before, she said, and the tail had got broken off and lost. And so she apologized for that, but the main part of the dolphin was still here. And so this is the gift from Ronnie, and she did eventually die of breast cancer, but not before we had quite a number of conversations about how, in the bigger picture, the adversity doesn't really matter. It matters in the moment when your nose is pressed to it and it gets difficult to see anything else. But in the bigger telling of her life, and I suppose in the bigger telling of my life, it's not the struggles that matter so much as the accomplishments. And the being in the struggles, and rather than reacting to the struggles and saying ouch when the pain comes, you can say ouch if you want, but if that's the only thing you say, the job is not finished. Because once I was done saying ouch when something hurt, I could go back to being who and what I am, even in the midst of the struggle. Even in the midst of her battle with breast cancer, Ronnie was this Italian woman with memories and convictions and aspirations and enormous strength of character and deep understanding and a breadth of understanding because of how chaotic a lot of her childhood had been. That hers was not an easy life either, and one would think for everything she'd been through, to add breast cancer to it is just too much. I mean, it's like, for crying out loud, hasn't she suffered enough already? But breast cancer was ultimately where her life came to a close. But even in that closure, it did not define who and what she was. And so in trying to grasp all of the contrasts and to recognize life as an opportunity to be a response rather than a reaction, I composed a song I simply called The Dolphin, which of course, because of the way dolphins' physiology is shaped, it looks like they're always smiling. And I can't believe it's because they're always happy, but I don't think it's because they're trying to hide their sadness either. I think the lesson I drew from it, my own artistic creative interpretation, was that their smile and their dancing and their leaping was one of the means of self-empowerment, the inspiration that they might give to themselves in the midst of their struggles to survive in oceans and adversarial circumstances. That in the midst of all that, they don't smile because it feels good. They smile because they decide to smile. And they're honest about the fact that it is a decision and not a reaction. It's not a reaction to being happy, but it's a choice to align oneself with a positive way of being, no matter how adversarial the currents of life may be. Out in the ocean the water is cold, and so filled with dangers below. But daring the darkness by singing with sharpness, the dolphin has lessons to show. Although there are losses and reasons to mourn, and sadness that can't be denied, with deliberate grace he again shows his face, and pushes his tears all aside. His smile is the sword by which grief is cut down. His laugh drives my doubts all away. The joy he embraces all sorrow displaces, and welcomes yet another new day. Though fishermen's nets and the teeth of his foes give reasons for tears to be shed, and moments of plenty when voices seem empty and no words of comfort are said, for words have their limits to express inner pain, but the heart knows what isn't confessed, that especially when losses great heaviness tosses, life can then in vision be dressed. His smile is the sword by which grief is cut down. His laugh drives my doubts all away. The joy he embraces all sorrow displaces, and welcomes yet another new day. Often in trouble he somehow appears, and sends evil fleeing in shame. By all that he's giving and joy in his living, I feel I know his true name. And so when he's down and not dancing around, I know that this time won't be long, till bursting the surface he renews his purpose of strengthening life to go on. His love is the sword by which hate is cut down. His song gives me faith to hold on. The joy in his leaping means I will be keeping my eyes toward the breaking of dawn. His smile is the sword by which grief is cut down. His laugh drives my doubts all away. The joy he embraces all sorrow displaces, and welcomes yet another new day. His smile is the sword by which grief is cut down. His laugh drives my doubts all away. The joy he embraces all sorrow displaces, and welcomes yet another new day. Imagine, if you will, being in a confrontation with someone who intends to do something harmful, will somehow give power over you. And instead of, it's not that you hide the pain, it's not that you hide the damage of what they're doing, but to look up and smile and say something like, good thing I'm bigger than this moment, or there's nothing you can do to hurt that which is truly me. You can give me a bad experience in this moment, you can give me reasons to avoid you in the future, but in the end I have the choice to be who I am. I have the ability to choose to be who I am, and to show you what kind of person I am, which is not at all like the person you're being. And in reminding oneself of that no matter what oppression is heaped upon oneself, that I have the ability to choose to be more than the product of this negative experience. And that is something about which to be happy, and about which to feel glad and to feel empowered. So that when something, a loss happens, to smile and, when going to a friend's funeral, for example, to smile afterwards and know that my friend would want me to smile, and to know that my friend would want me to carry on and to do the good work that he and I had often discussed doing, and not to be stuck in that moment of grief, but with that smile to make my choice to step into the future beyond that moment. To smile not because I'm forgetting, not because it doesn't hurt to have my friend gone, but to smile because of what we envision because what we envision together is genuinely good and genuinely worth smiling about. To let our laughter be a kind of bugle that signals a decision to charge forward into whatever life has to offer. To allow laughter to be the wake-up call that life will not remain in a dark, depressed, discouraged place because of the possibilities that each new moment offers, because of the potentiality that each new moment has, because each new day is a day when I can do something that I didn't do the day before, and thereby steer my life in a direction that perhaps even just the day before it wasn't going. I can choose to pursue things or to let go of things. I can choose love instead of hate. I can choose to sing instead of be silent. I can recognize that, well, she could recognize that breast cancer couldn't keep her from singing. And whatever life holds each step of the way, fiercely determining that one will not give up, one will persist. And, it's been said plenty of times that life is not a destination, but a journey. The dolphin's journey, curiously, is one of the few animals, I suppose, considering the number of creatures there are on the earth. There are relatively few that experience both underwater and above in the world of air, and it's like two completely different worlds. And to be one that can move between them and have some sort of understanding and actually a need for both, and to find a way to keep the two in harmony, no matter what dangers either one holds. To find a way to make life worth living, even when it doesn't make sense. And to trust that at some point, perhaps it will. But because life is this magical, interconnected thing, where we move between worlds, leaping into the air and then diving below the surface into the water, looking into the depths of meaning, perhaps even the subconscious mind, interpreting dreams or following intuitions, and then leaping into the air of public interaction and the adversarial forces and other beings that may be there at times. And knowing that we need to leap into the air and we need to breathe that air, but that we don't have to remain there 100% of the time, and in fact we can't remain there 100% of the time. We have to go back and forth between the two and weave the two together. I always kind of thought the dolphins going up and down through the waves was almost like the needle of a needle and thread, stitching two completely different fabrics together till they form one connected world. Radical differences, perhaps, but complementary and, in some sense, genuinely essential to each other. I hope the thoughts I've shared in the last half hour have been helpful to you, and that whatever worlds you move between, that you will find the smile that is a sword and the laughter that drives doubts away, and the determination to be who and what you are in the most beautiful and wonderful way. Because there are multiple worlds depending upon it, and many more people watching and being inspired by you probably than you will ever realize. Especially when you do your leaping and your laughing in the most beautiful way you can. And let others remember you as being more than just the shadow who dipped below the surface for a while, but to see you instead as the vibrant being leaping into the air and calling out with a voice that is uniquely yours. Life is to be celebrated. Thank you.